The scream died in Tobias Emerson's throat when he saw what lay broken and bleeding among the golden stalks of his wheat field, not a woman, but an orc, green-skinned and tusked, her leather armor torn and her body trembling with pain, and something else he recognized from his years in the war: fear. She looked up at him with eyes the color of amber, bright against her forest-green skin, and whispered in a voice barely louder than the rustling wheat around them, "Don't tell them I'm here." Her hand, large and calloused but somehow graceful, clutched at a wound in her side that leaked dark blood into the earth beneath her. "Please. They'll kill me if they find me." Tobias stood frozen, his harvesting scythe forgotten in his hand, his mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. He'd spent 3 years fighting orcs on the northern border before a knee injury sent him limping back to his family's abandoned farm. He'd seen what orcs could do to human settlements, had lost friends to their raids. But he'd also seen what humans did to orcs, had watched his own commander execute prisoners who'd surrendered, had heard the screams that haunted his dreams. This orc woman, and she was young, he realized, probably no more than 20 winters, wasn't attacking him. She was dying. "Who's looking for you?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Everyone," she breathed, and her eyes fluttered closed for a moment before snapping back open with visible effort. "My clan. The human soldiers. I ran, I'm a coward, and now I'm dead either way." Tobias looked around his field, scanning the tree line that bordered his property to the north. The wheat here grew tall enough to hide her from casual observation, but if anyone came searching with dogs or magic, she wouldn't stay hidden for long. His farmhouse sat a quarter-mile away, small and humble but solid. He'd spent the last 2 years rebuilding it, working the land alone, avoiding the nearby town except when he needed supplies. He should turn her in. There was probably a bounty. At the very least, the local militia would be grateful, might stop looking at him with that mixture of pity and suspicion they'd worn since he'd returned from the war, changed and quiet. But when he looked back down at her, he saw the way her hand trembled against her wound, saw the resignation in her eyes that said she expected him to finish what her enemies had started. "Can you walk?" he heard himself ask. Hope flickered across her broad features, followed immediately by suspicion. "Why?" "Because I'm not going to carry you across this entire field if you can manage on your own." He stuck his scythe into the ground and held out his hand. "I have a root cellar. It's cool and dark and no one ever goes down there but me." She stared at his hand like it might turn into a snake. "You're helping me. I'm making a decision I'll probably regret," Tobias said. "Now, are you going to take my hand or are you going to bleed out in my wheat field? Because if you die here, I'll have a hell of a time explaining the body." A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh or a sob. Her hand, warm and rough-palmed, grasped his, and he pulled her to her feet with more effort than he'd expected. She was tall, nearly his height, and broad-shouldered beneath her torn armor. The movement made her gasp in pain, and more blood seeped between her fingers where they pressed against her side. "Easy," Tobias said, slipping his arm around her waist to support her weight. The practical part of his mind noted that if she wanted to kill him, now would be the moment. The rest of him was too busy trying to figure out if he'd lost his mind entirely. "Lean on me. We'll take it slow." They moved through the wheat like shadows, her labored breathing harsh in his ear, her weight heavy against his side. She was stronger than she looked had to be, to keep moving with a wound like that, but he could feel her weakening with every step. By the time they reached the farmhouse, her skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and her steps were more stumble than walk. The root cellar entrance sat behind the house, hidden from the road by the building itself. Tobias had built a new door for it last spring, solid oak with a lock. He maneuvered them down the stone steps carefully, grateful that he'd cleaned the space out just last week. The cellar smelled of earth and stored vegetables, cool and dark and quiet. "There's a cot in the corner," he said, guiding her toward it. "I use it sometimes when the summer heat gets too bad upstairs." She collapsed onto the cot more than sat, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. In the dim light from the open door above, her blood looked almost black against her green skin. Tobias lit the oil lamp that hung from a hook on one of the support beams, and warm light filled the space. "I need to see the wound," he said, trying to make his voice calm and professional, the way the army healers used to sound. "Can you move your hand?" She looked up at him, and he saw the calculation in her eyes, still trying to decide if this was a trap, if he was going to hurt her. Then, slowly, she moved her hand away. The wound was a deep gash that ran from just below her ribs to her hip, the kind of injury that came from a sword or a large knife. It was still bleeding, but slower now. Tobias had seen worse in the war, had learned enough field medicine to know this was survivable if he could stop the bleeding and keep infection from setting in. "I need to get supplies," he said. "Water, bandages, needle and thread. Are you allergic to any herbs?" She shook her head mutely, her eyes never leaving his face. "I'm going to lock the door," he continued. "Not to trap you, you couldn't get far anyway in your condition. But if anyone comes looking, I need them to think this is just a normal root cellar. Don't make any noise, no matter what you hear." "Understand. Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice stronger now that she was lying down. Tobias paused at the bottom of the stairs. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I'm tired of all the killing. Maybe because I'm a fool. Does it matter?" "It matters to me," she said quietly. "I'm Korgana, of the Red Stone clan, or I was before I." She trailed off. "Tobias," he said. "Emerson, wheat farmer and apparently harborer of fugitives." He climbed the stairs without waiting for her response and locked the door behind him. His hands were shaking as he gathered what he needed from the house, his medical kit from the war. Thank the gods he'd kept it. Clean cloth for bandages. A bottle of strong alcohol for sterilizing. He filled a pitcher with fresh water from the well and found the tin of dried yarrow and comfrey he'd harvested last summer. The whole time, his mind kept circling back to the insanity of what he was doing. If anyone found out he was hiding an orc, they'd hang him. Or worse, send him back to the army for trial. The peace treaty between humans and the orc clans was fragile, barely a year old, and tensions were still high. People in town still locked their doors at night and told horror stories about orc raids, and here he was, patching one up in his root cellar. But when he unlocked the door and climbed back down into the cellar, he found Korgana exactly where he'd left her, her eyes closed and her breathing shallow. She looked younger in the lamplight, vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. "Still with me?" he asked, setting his supplies on the small table near the cot, her eyes opened. "Unfortunately for both of us. Let's keep it that way." He poured alcohol over his hands and then the needle and thread. "This is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts," she said, but there was a note of dark humor in her voice. "Do what you must." He'd stitched up wounds before, but never on an orc. Her skin was thicker than human skin, tougher, and he had to push harder with the needle than he'd expected. To her credit, Korgana barely flinched, though he could see the tension in her jaw and the way her hands clenched into fists on the cot. He worked as quickly as he could, cleaning the wound with alcohol which made her hiss through her small tusks before closing it with neat, even stitches. "You've done this before," she said when he tied off the final stitch. "War," he said simply. "You learn a lot of things you wish you didn't have to know." He mixed the dried herbs into a paste with a little water and spread it gently over the stitched wound before wrapping it with clean bandages. That should hold if you don't move around too much. The herbs will help prevent infection. Thank you, she said, and the words sounded strange coming from her, as if she wasn't used to saying them. Tobias stood and wiped his hands on a rag. You should rest. I'll bring you food and more water later after dark. In the meantime, stay quiet. I have work to do, and if anyone comes by, I need to seem normal. Wait, Korgana said as he turned to leave. Why did you say you'd probably regret this, helping me? He looked back at her, at this orc woman who'd stumbled into his life and upended everything. Because I spent 3 years fighting your people. Because this town already thinks I'm strange for living out here alone. Because if they find out, they'll destroy everything I've tried to build. He paused. But mostly because I think you're going to make me care about whether you live or die, and I've spent 2 years trying very hard not to care about anything at all. Her amber eyes widened slightly, and something passed across her face that he couldn't quite read. I'll leave as soon as I can travel, she said. I won't bring trouble to your door. Too late for that, Tobias said, but his voice was gentle. Sleep now. We'll figure out the rest later. He locked the cellar door and went back to his field, back to the spot where he'd found her. The blood was already drying into the soil, dark against the golden wheat. He'd have to be more careful, he realized. If anyone came searching, this would lead them right to him. He spent an hour cutting the blood-stained wheat and scattering fresh dirt over the stains, making it look like nothing more than a small, disturbed patch of earth. The sun was high overhead by the time he finished, sweat running down his back and his knee aching from the exertion. He forced himself to spend the rest of the day working his field as he normally would, cutting wheat and binding it into sheaves, acting like a man with nothing to hide. But his mind was in the root cellar, wondering if Korgana was still breathing, if her wound had started bleeding again, if he'd made a terrible mistake. As the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tobias made a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried meat. He filled a cup with cool water and another with weak tea, then carried it all down to the cellar once full darkness had fallen. Korgana was awake, sitting up on the cot with her back against the stone wall. She looked better, her skin had lost that grayish tinge, and her eyes were clearer. You came back, she said, and he heard the relief in her voice. Said I would. He handed her the plate and cup. It's not much, but it's what I have. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. This is more than I deserve, she said between bites. More than I expected from a human. Tobias sat down on the floor with his back against a barrel of stored potatoes, giving her space. What happened to you? Why are you running from both humans and orcs? She was quiet for a long moment, chewing slowly, her gaze fixed on the plate in her hands. My clan. We were one of the ones who didn't want the peace treaty. We wanted to keep fighting, keep taking what we needed from human lands, but She paused, her hands tightening around the plate. I was tired of the violence, tired of the raids and the killing and the hatred. During one of our attacks on a human village, I saw a child, a little human girl, maybe 6 winters old. She was crying over her mother's body. Korgana's voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. And I realized that's all we were doing. Creating more orphans, more hatred, more reasons for the war to continue, so I tried to stop it, tried to convince my clan leader to honor the treaty, to find another way. She looked up at him and he saw old pain in her eyes. They called me a traitor, a coward, said I'd gone soft, my own father. She touched her side gently near the bandaged wound. This was his parting gift. Your father did that to you. Tobias felt anger kindle in his chest. He said I was already dead to him, better to make it official. She set the empty plate aside. I ran. The clan sent hunters after me. They can't afford to let betrayal go unpunished. And human soldiers spotted me crossing into this territory. They didn't stop to ask questions, just attacked. I've been running for 3 days, trying to stay ahead of both groups." She laughed bitterly. "I don't belong anywhere now, not with orcs, not with humans." "You belong here," Tobias said, and then blinked, surprised by his own words. "I mean for now, until you're healed, until we figure out something safer." Korgana studied him with those penetrating amber eyes. "You're not what I expected, Tobias Emerson. Most humans I've met would have killed me on sight." "Most orcs I've met would have killed me too," he countered. "Maybe we're both strange." The corner of her mouth twitched upward, a hint of a smile around her small tusks. "Maybe we are." He left her to rest and went back upstairs, but sleep eluded him that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the presence beneath his house. An orc woman. In his root cellar. It was absurd. It was dangerous. It was probably going to get him killed. But it also felt like the first right thing he'd done since coming home from the war. The next 3 days fell into an uneasy routine. Tobias worked his fields during the day, keeping up appearances, while spending his evenings in the cellar with Korgana. He brought her meals, changed her bandages, and slowly, cautiously, they began to talk. She told him about life in an orc clan, the strict hierarchies, the constant pressure to prove strength and loyalty, the way weakness was punished and compassion seen as a flaw. He told her about the war from a human soldier's perspective, about the friends he'd lost, and the things he'd done that he couldn't take back, about how he'd returned home to find his parents dead from fever and the farm falling into ruin. "Why did you come back here?" she asked on the 3rd evening, watching him rewrap her wound. It was healing well, the edges already beginning to close. "You could have stayed in a city, found easier work." "Because I needed space," Tobias said, "needed quiet. In the city, everyone wants to talk about the war, wants to hear war stories or tell me how brave I was. But there's nothing brave about surviving when better people didn't." He finished tying off the bandage. "Out here, it's just me and the land. The wheat doesn't care about my past." "Is that why you live alone? No wife, no family?" He sat back, considering how much to share. "There was a woman before the war, Clara. We were going to be married when I got back." He smiled sadly. "But the person who came back wasn't the person who left. She tried for a few months, but I could see the fear in her eyes every time I woke up screaming from nightmares. She married a shopkeeper in town last spring. I think she's happier." "You still love her?" "I don't know," Tobias admitted. "I think I love who she was, who we were. But that's all gone now. Sometimes I wonder if I'm capable of that kind of feeling anymore." Korgana was quiet, her fingers tracing the pattern on the blanket he'd brought down for her. "My clan had arranged a mating for me," she said finally. "To Grosh, the son of one of our best warriors. He was strong, skilled in battle, everything an orc woman should want." She looked up at him. "But he was cruel. He enjoyed hurting things, especially things weaker than him. I told my father I wouldn't accept the match, and he said I was being foolish, that love was a luxury and strength was what mattered." She shook her head. "Maybe that's another reason they were so quick to cast me out. I was already a disappointment." "Their loss," Tobias said firmly. "You had the strength to stand up for what you believed in. That's worth more than being good at hitting things." She laughed, a real laugh this time, rich and warm. "Tell that to my clan." "I would if I could," he said, and meant it. That night, as he lay in bed, Tobias realized he was looking forward to his evening visits to the cellar. Looking forward to hearing Korgana's voice, to the way she listened when he spoke, to the small moments of humor they'd begun to share. It terrified him. On the 4th day, trouble arrived. Tobias was in the barn, repairing a broken wagon wheel, when he heard horses approaching. He set down his tools and walked out to find 3 men on horseback, all wearing the colors of the local militia. He recognized the leader, Marcus Dalton, a man who'd served in the same company as Tobias during the war but who'd emerged from it with his patriotic fervor intact. "Emerson," Marcus said by way of greeting, not dismounting. "We're searching for a fugitive orc, female, young, probably injured." "Seen anything unusual?" Tobias kept his expression neutral, grateful for the years of keeping his emotions hidden. "An orc, out here. Can't say I have. What'd she do?" "Does it matter?" one of the other men said. "An orc's an orc." Marcus shot the man a look before turning back to Tobias. "She's wanted by both her clan and our forces. Apparently she's some kind of deserter, dangerous either way." His eyes swept over the farm, taking in the wheat fields, the house, the barn. "You're out here all alone. If she's desperate, she might try to hide on your property." "Mind if we have a look around?" Every muscle in Tobias's body tensed, but he forced himself to shrug casually. "Look all you want, but I've been working these fields every day. I'd notice an orc." The men dismounted and began searching, poking into the barn, walking through the wheat fields. Tobias followed them, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. When Marcus moved toward the house, Tobias forced himself not to react, even as panic clawed at his throat. The root cellar. If they found the root cellar. But Marcus only glanced through the windows of the house before moving on. "Looks clear," he said finally. "But keep watch, Emerson. If you see anything, report it immediately. There's a reward, 50 silver pieces." "I'll keep my eyes open," Tobias said, amazed at how steady his voice sounded. The men mounted their horses and rode off, and Tobias stood there for a long moment, his hands shaking with delayed fear. 50 silver pieces. That was more money than he'd make in 3 good harvests, and all he had to do was turn in the injured orc hiding in his cellar. He didn't go down to see Korgana until well after dark, afraid that somehow his expression would give him away if he saw her too soon. When he finally unlocked the cellar door, he found her standing at the bottom of the stairs, her posture tense. "I heard horses," she said. "Voices. Militia. They're searching for you." He handed her the dinner he'd brought, stew this time, hearty and warm. "They searched the property, but they didn't find the cellar." She took the bowl with trembling hands. "They'll come back. They always do." "Maybe." He sat down on the bottom step. "They offered a reward, 50 silver pieces." Korgana went very still. That's a lot of money for a human farmer." "It is." She set the bowl down untouched and straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin in a gesture that was probably meant to look proud but just made her look young and scared. "Then turn me in. You've done more than enough already, more than I could have asked for. You want me to turn you in?" "Of course not," she snapped. "I want to live, but I won't blame you if you choose the money over a stranger. It's the logical choice." Tobias stood and crossed to where she stood, close enough that he had to look up slightly to meet her eyes. "I don't want the money, I want—" He paused, suddenly aware of how close they were, of how her eyes had widened slightly. "I want to know that I chose kindness over cruelty, that I chose to be better than what the war made me. Does that make sense?" "No," she said softly, "but I'm grateful for it anyway." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken hanging in the air between them, before Tobias stepped back and cleared his throat. "Your wound is healing well. Another few days and you should be able to travel if you're careful. We need to figure out where you can go. Somewhere safe." Korgana picked up her bowl of stew again, but he could see the hopelessness in her eyes. "There is nowhere safe. Not for me. The borderlands are patrolled by human soldiers. The orc territories are controlled by clans who will kill me on sight for my betrayal. I could try to go north into the wild lands, but," she shrugged, "I'd be alone, Orcs aren't meant to be alone. Neither are humans, Tobias said quietly. But we manage, do we? She looked at him pointedly. You hide out here on your farm, avoiding the town, avoiding people. Is that managing, or is that just surviving? Her words hit harder than he'd expected. Maybe there's not much difference. Maybe, she agreed. Or maybe both of us are too scared to hope for anything better. That night, Tobias lay awake again, but this time his mind wasn't racing with fear. Instead, he was thinking about what Korgana had said. Was he just surviving? He'd told himself he came here to heal, to find peace, but had he really? Or had he just found a different kind of hiding? The next morning, he woke with an idea forming. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it wouldn't leave him alone. He spent the day working it through in his mind, examining it from every angle, testing its logic. That evening, he came down to the cellar with a proposal. "Stay," he said without preamble. Korgana looked up from the book he'd brought her the day before, a collection of farming almanacs, which she'd been reading with surprising interest. "What? Stay here? On the farm?" He sat down across from her. "I need help with the harvest anyway. The wheat needs to be cut, threshed, and stored before the autumn rains come, and it's more work than one person can handle. You could work in exchange for room and board." "Tobias, that's insane. Someone will see me." "Not if we're careful. The farm is isolated. I rarely get visitors except for supply runs to town. You could stay in the cellar during the day, work at night when there's less chance of being seen. By the time anyone notices anything strange, you'll be strong enough to move on if you want to." He leaned forward. "Or maybe you won't want to. Maybe by then we'll have figured something else out." "You're risking everything for me," Korgana said, her voice thick with emotion. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being alone," Tobias admitted. "Because you're the first person in 2 years who's talked to me like I'm a person, not a war hero or a victim. Because—" He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Because I think you might be my friend, and I haven't had one of those in a long time." Tears welled in Korgana's amber eyes. "I think you might be mine too. So stay," he said again. "At least for a while. We'll figure out the rest as we go." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You're absolutely mad, you know that, I've been told," he grinned. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she said, and smiled back, her small tusks catching the lamplight. "Gods help us both." The arrangement proved easier than Tobias had expected. Korgana was a quick healer orc constitution, she explained, and within a week she was able to move around without pain. She spent her days in the cellar, reading, resting, and gradually regaining her strength. At night, when the world was dark and quiet, they worked together in the fields. Tobias had forgotten what it was like to work alongside someone else, to share the burden of labor. Korgana was strong, stronger than any human woman would have been, and she approached the work with a determination that impressed him. They cut wheat under the stars. The scythe sounds rhythmic and soothing, their breath misting in the cool night air. "This is peaceful," Korgana said one night, pausing to look up at the sky. "In my clan there was always noise, always fighting or arguing or planning the next raid, but this—" She gestured to the quiet field. "This is nice." "It is," Tobias agreed, standing beside her. "Though I'll admit it's nicer with company." She glanced at him, and even in the moonlight he could see the warmth in her expression. "For me too." They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. Tobias would work the visible parts of the farm during the day, then join Korgana at night for the harder labor. They talked as they worked, sharing stories, debating philosophy, laughing at each other's jokes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls they'd both built around themselves began to crumble. Tobias learned that Korgana loved stories, that she had a sharp wit and a surprisingly gentle heart. She was fascinated by human farming techniques, by the idea of growing things instead of just taking them. She talked about wanting to learn to cook, to make things with her hands that didn't involve weapons or armor. Korgana learned that Tobias had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was kinder than he thought he was, that he loved the quiet moments of the day when the sun rose over his fields. He told her about his dreams for the farm, about expanding the wheat fields, maybe getting some chickens, possibly a cow if he saved enough. "You're building a life here," she said one night, wonder in her voice. "A real life." "Trying to," he said. "It's harder alone than I thought it would be." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't have to be alone." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Tobias felt his heart rate pick up, felt the careful distance they'd maintained start to shrink. "Korgana." "I know," she said quickly. "I know it's complicated. I know it's dangerous. I wanted you to know that you're not alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be." He reached out and took her hand, that same rough, palmed hand he'd helped her up with weeks ago. "I don't want to be," he said quietly. Her fingers tightened around his, and they stood there in the wheat field under the stars, holding hands like awkward youngsters, both too aware of what they were beginning to feel and too scared to name it. But not everything was peaceful. A week later, Tobias made his monthly trip to town for supplies. He was loading flour and salt into his wagon when he overheard conversation from the nearby tavern. "They're organizing a larger search," someone was saying. "The orc clans sent a messenger. They want the deserter found and returned to them for justice." "Justice," another voice scoffed. "They mean execution." "Aye, but if we turn her over, it'll improve relations with the clans, show we're willing to cooperate on matters of law." Tobias's blood ran cold. He quickly finished loading his supplies and headed back to the farm, his mind racing. If the authorities were cooperating with the orc clans, Korgana was in even more danger than they'd thought. They couldn't just wait this out anymore. He found her in the cellar when he returned, and the fear on his face must have shown because she stood up immediately. "What happened?" He told her everything he'd heard. "They're organizing a proper search, and they're working with your clan." He ran a hand through his hair. "We need a better plan, something more permanent." "I'll leave," Korgana said immediately. "Tonight, I'll head north into the wild lands. At least then you'll be safe." "No." The word came out more forcefully than he'd intended. "We'll think of something else." "Tobias, there is nothing else. I can't keep hiding in your cellar forever, and I can't risk bringing danger to your door." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You've given me weeks I wouldn't have had otherwise. That's more than—" "It's not enough," he interrupted. He crossed to her and took both her hands in his. "What if you didn't hide? What if we made this legitimate?" "What are you talking about?" His heart was pounding, but the idea that had been forming in his mind suddenly felt crystal clear. "The law says that orcs who are legally employed by humans and living peacefully under human household protection are granted residency rights. It's part of the treaty." "Yes, but that's for orcs who come through proper channels with documentation, or for orcs who are married to human citizens," Tobias continued. "A spouse has automatic residency rights. They can't be deported or turned over to clan law without the spouse's consent." Korgana stared at him. "You're not suggesting—" "Marry me," Tobias said. The words felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Not for real, not if you don't want it to be, but on paper, legally. It would protect you, give you a legitimate reason to be here." "That's insane," she breathed. They'd never believe it. A human farmer and an orc woman. Why not? The treaty has been in place for over a year now. There have been other mixed marriages, rare as they are, and we have a plausible story. You came to the area looking for work. I hired you to help with the harvest. We fell in love." He squeezed her hands. "It could work. or it could get you killed. If people think you've betrayed your own kind, let me worry about that." He searched her face, trying to read her expression. "I know it's a lot to ask. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but Korgana, He paused, realizing he was about to say something true and terrifying. "I don't want you to leave. This started as me trying to keep you alive, but it's become more than that. You've become important to me." "You've become important to me too," she whispered. "More important than I knew was possible in such a short time." "But Tobias, marriage is a legal document," he said firmly. "That's all it has to be. We can figure out the rest later. But right now, I need to know you're safe. I need to know they can't take you away." Korgana closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were full of emotion. "You're really willing to do this, to tie yourself to me, knowing what it could cost you?" "I am." "Then yes," she said, and a tear escaped down her green cheek. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by terror at what they were about to do. He pulled her into a hug, feeling her strong arms wrap around him, her chin resting on his shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, both knowing they'd just irrevocably changed the course of their lives. The next morning, Tobias rode into town to speak with the local magistrate. He told the story they'd rehearsed, that he'd met an orc woman at a border settlement, that she'd been looking to leave her clan and start a new life, that he'd offered her work, and somewhere along the way they'd fallen in love. It sounded implausible even to his own ears, but he delivered it with steady conviction. The magistrate, an older man named Aldrich, listened with raised eyebrows. "This is unusual, Emerson. You understand that?" "I do, sir, but it's not illegal." "No, not illegal." Aldrich leaned back in his chair. "But it will cause talk. Some folks won't take kindly to it." "Some folks don't take kindly to a lot of things," Tobias said. "That doesn't make those things wrong." Aldrich studied him for a long moment. "You're certain about this?" "Once it's registered, it's not easily undone." "I'm certain." "Then bring the lady in. I'll need to verify her identity, make sure there are no outstanding warrants, and then we can process the marriage license." He paused. "You should know, if she's a clan deserter, I'll have to report her presence. The treaty requires cooperation between human and orc authorities." Tobias's stomach dropped. "And if she is a deserter, then we'll need to determine if she committed any crimes before she left. If not, and if she's willing to formally renounce her clan ties, she should be able to claim refugee status." Aldrich's expression softened slightly. "I fought in the war too, son. I'm not eager to send anyone back to execution if it can be avoided, but we have to follow the proper procedures." It took 2 nerve-wracking days to sort through all the legal requirements. Korgana, wearing a simple dress Tobias had bought for her, sat through questioning from the magistrate and a representative from the Orc Treaty Office. She told her story calmly, admitting her desertion but explaining her reasons, her opposition to the continued violence, her hope for peace. The Orc representative, an older male named Urgath, regarded her with something between contempt and pity. "Your clan has declared you dead," he said finally. "As far as they're concerned, you no longer exist. However, the treaty requires that we verify you committed no war crimes or murders before your desertion." "I participated in raids," Korgana said steadily. "I fought human soldiers. But I never harmed civilians, and I never killed anyone who wasn't armed and threatening me. That's part of why my clan turned on me. They saw my reluctance as weakness." Urgath made some notes in his ledger. "Given that your clan has formally disowned you and there are no specific criminal charges, and given that you're seeking to integrate into human society under legal marriage, I see no reason to oppose your residency." He looked at Tobias. But understand, human, if she breaks any laws or causes any trouble, the protection of marriage won't save her. She'll be deported or worse." "She won't cause trouble," Tobias said firmly. "See that she doesn't." Urgath stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, girl, I hope you find what you're looking for. There are more of us who are tired of the fighting than you might think. We're just not brave enough to do what you did." After he left, Korgana sat very still, staring at her hands. "That was surreal," she said finally. "But it worked," Tobias said. "You're legal now. As long as we're married, you're protected." She looked up at him. "And how long are we planning to be married?" It was a fair question, one they'd carefully avoided discussing. "As long as you want to be," Tobias said. "If you want to eventually move on, go somewhere else, we can figure out an amicable separation. But for now—" He offered his hand. "Shall we make this official?" The wedding itself was a brief, bureaucratic affair in the magistrate's office, with Aldrich's clerk serving as witness. They signed the documents, exchanged simple rings Tobias had purchased from the town blacksmith, and then it was done. Tobias, Emerson, and Korgana were married in the eyes of the law. As they walked back to the wagon, Korgana kept looking at the ring on her finger, a simple band of iron. "It's strange," she said. "In my clan, matings were elaborate ceremonies with feasts and challenges and declarations. This was just signatures on paper." "Does that bother you?" She considered the question. "No, in a way it feels more real. We didn't do this because tradition demanded it or because our families arranged it. We did it because we chose to, because we wanted to protect each other." She smiled at him. "That's worth more than any ceremony. We could still have a celebration," Tobias offered. "Nothing fancy, but maybe a nice dinner. I'm not much of a cook, but I could attempt something better than my usual fare." "I'd like that," she said softly. News of the marriage spread through the small community faster than fire through dry grass. Over the next week, Tobias received the full spectrum of reactions. Some people, like the elderly couple who owned the general store, offered cautious congratulations and seemed genuinely curious about Korgana. Others, like Marcus from the militia, made their disapproval clear through cold glares and muttered comments about orc lovers. The worst was when Tobias encountered his former fiancée Clara in town. She looked at him with something like pity mixed with disgust. "I heard about your wife," she said. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You came back from the war wrong, Tobias. I just didn't realize how wrong." Her words stung more than he'd expected, but as he rode back to the farm, he found he didn't care as much as he thought he would. Clara saw his marriage to Korgana as evidence of his brokenness, but she was wrong. For the first time since returning from the war, he felt like he was healing. Korgana was waiting for him when he got back, sitting on the porch in the afternoon sun. She no longer had to hide, though she still preferred to stay close to the farm. "You were gone a while," she said, standing as he approached. "Everything all right?" "Just town gossip," he said, tying up the horse. "Nothing I can't handle. How was your day?" "Productive." She gestured toward the field. "I finished cutting the east section, and I think I figured out how to work your old loom. There are some repairs needed on the house linens, and I thought I'd try my hand at weaving." Tobias climbed the porch steps and stood beside her, looking out over the farm. The wheat was nearly all harvested now, golden sheaves drying in neat rows. The house looked better than it had in years, with small repairs and improvements that Korgana had been making. It looked like a home. "You don't have to do all this," he said quietly. "The marriage is legal whether you work yourself to exhaustion or not." "I know," she said, "but I want to, this place. It feels like mine now, like ours. I want to take care of it." She glanced at him. "Is that strange?" "No," he said, and realized he meant it. "It's not strange at all." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Without really thinking about it, Tobias reached out and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his, and they stayed like that until the stars began to emerge overhead. As summer faded into autumn, their partnership deepened. They worked together to bring in the full harvest, storing wheat in the barn and selling surplus in town. With Korgana's help, Tobias was able to produce more than he ever had alone, and for the first time in years, he had real savings. But more than that, they were building something neither of them had quite expected. What had started as a marriage of convenience was slowly becoming something real. They shared meals, shared stories, shared the mundane intimacies of daily life. Tobias learned that Korgana sang while she worked, old orc ballads in a rich alto voice. Korgana learned that Tobias had a habit of talking to his plants, encouraging them to grow. There were awkward moments, too. They'd maintained separate sleeping spaces, Tobias in his bedroom upstairs, Korgana in the cellar, which they'd converted into a comfortable room. But sometimes Tobias would catch himself wishing she was closer, would find excuses to be near her, to touch her hand or shoulder. And he noticed she did the same, their interactions becoming more frequent, more lingering. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Korgana said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Tobias looked up from the harness he was mending. "What is it?" "I'm happy here," she said, staring into the flames. "Happier than I've ever been. This life, this farm, working beside you, it's everything I didn't know I wanted." She turned to face him. "But I need to know if this is real for you, if I'm more to you than just a legal arrangement." His heart started pounding. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both of them afraid to voice what was growing between them. "You are," he said. "You're much more than that. Then what am I to you?" He set aside the harness and moved to sit beside her. "You're my partner. My friend. The person I look forward to seeing every morning and the last person I want to talk to every night. He took a breath. "You're the first thing that's made me feel alive since the war ended, and I think—" He reached up to cup her face, his thumb brushing over the strong line of her jaw. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Her eyes widened, amber catching the firelight. "Truly, truly," he said. "I know this started as an arrangement. I know we're from different worlds, different species, and there's 1,000 reasons this shouldn't work. But Korgana, when I'm with you, none of that matters. You matter." Tears spilled down her green cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for weeks, I think, but I was too afraid to say it, afraid you'd see it as me taking advantage of your kindness." "Never," he said fiercely. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, both of them learning the shape and feel of each other. Her tusks pressed lightly against his face, and her lips were softer than he'd imagined. When they pulled apart, Korgana was smiling through her tears. "I've never kissed anyone before," she admitted. "In orc culture, kissing isn't really done, but I liked it." "Good," Tobias said, grinning, "because I plan to do it a lot more." They sat together by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked late into the night. They spoke about the future, about possibilities and dreams. Korgana wanted to learn more about farming, maybe expand into vegetable gardens and orchards. Tobias talked about his hope to eventually hire help, to turn the farm into something bigger, something that could support a family. "A family?" Korgana asked softly. "If that's something you'd want," he said carefully. "I know it's complicated. I don't even know if humans and orcs can." "We can," she said. "It's rare but not unheard of. Half-orcs exist, though they're often outcasts in both worlds." She was quiet for a moment. "I never let myself think about having children. In my clan, I would have been expected to produce warriors, to raise them for battle. But the idea of raising children here in peace, teaching them to grow things instead of destroy them. She looked up at him. That sounds wonderful. Then maybe someday, Tobias said, kissing her forehead. When we're ready. When the world is a little bit safer. That night, Korgana didn't go down to the cellar. She stayed with Tobias and they fell asleep together in his bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her. It felt natural, right, like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place. The piece they'd found was shattered a few weeks later when a group of riders appeared on the farm. Tobias saw them coming and recognized the orc clan colors, immediately: red stone, Korgana's former clan. "Stay inside," he told Korgana urgently. "Let me handle this." "No," she said, her face pale but determined. "They're here for me. I won't hide behind you." They went out together to meet the riders, 5 orc warriors, heavily armed, led by a massive male with scars crisscrossing his green skin. He dismounted and regarded Korgana with cold fury. "Korgana," he said. "Or should I say the orc who was Korgana? I am Thrask, war leader of Red Stone. Your father sends his regards." "I have no father," Korgana said, her voice steady despite the tension in her body. "He made that clear when he cut me open and left me to die." "You should have died," Thrask agreed. "But I see you found a human to nurse you back to health. How fitting that a traitor ends up with the enemy." "He's not the enemy," Korgana said, "and I'm not a traitor. I just refuse to keep killing for no reason." Thrask's lip curled. "You're weak. But that doesn't matter now. You've been formally declared dead by the clan. We only came to verify you're alive and under human protection." He pulled out a document and handed it to Tobias. "This confirms we've located you and relinquish all clan claim to your life or service. You're banished permanently. If you ever set foot in clan territory again, you'll be executed on sight." Korgana took the document with shaking hands. "So I'm free." "Free to live among humans, if you can call that freedom," Thrask said with disgust. He turned to mount his horse, then paused. "There are others, you know. Others in the clan who question the endless fighting. Your father executed 3 of them after you left, as an example. I hope your freedom was worth their lives." The words hit Korgana like a physical blow. Tobias saw her stagger and immediately moved to support her. "Get off my land," he said to Thrask, his voice hard. "You've delivered your message, now leave." Thrask studied him for a moment. "You care for her." "I can see it. I don't understand it, but I can see it." He shook his head. "The world is changing in ways I don't like, but perhaps that's because I'm getting old." He mounted his horse. "Take care of our lost lamb, human. She's your burden now." They watched the riders disappear down the road, and then Korgana collapsed against Tobias, great sobs shaking her body. "They died because of me," she choked out. 3 more deaths to add to all the others." "No," Tobias said firmly, holding her tight. "They died because your father is a murderer who can't stand to have his authority questioned. Their blood is on his hands, not yours. But if you hadn't left, you'd be dead. And those people still would have questioned eventually and probably still would have died. You can't take responsibility for someone else's evil, Korgana." He pulled back to look at her face, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You made the brave choice. You chose peace over violence, love over hatred. Don't let him poison that." She clung to him, and he held her while she grieved for the clan members who died, for the life she'd lost, for the orc she'd been before everything changed. But when she finally pulled away, there was something resolute in her expression. "I'm done mourning what I left behind," she said. "This is my life now, here with you, and I'm going to make it mean something." Winter came to the farm, bringing cold winds and early snow. Tobias and Korgana spent the dark months working on indoor projects, repairing tools, planning for the spring planting. They fell into the comfortable rhythms of married life. and the labels that had once felt strange husband, wife, began to feel natural. They made love for the first time on a night when snow fell softly outside. The world hushed and peaceful. It was tender and slightly awkward, both of them learning what brought the other pleasure, but it was also profound in its intimacy. Afterward, lying tangled together under warm blankets, Korgana traced patterns on Tobias's chest. "I never thought I could have this," she said softly. "Gentleness, partnership, love. Neither did I," he admitted. "After the war, I thought that part of me was dead, but you brought me back to life." "We brought each other back," she corrected, and kissed him. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, they began to venture into town together more often. It was still uncomfortable. People stared. Some made rude comments, and there were shops that made it clear they weren't welcome. But there were also people who were kind, who accepted their relationship with curiosity rather than hostility. The elderly couple from the general store became friends, inviting them for dinner and asking Korgana to teach them about orc herbs and medicines. One day in late spring, a year after they'd first met, Tobias came in from checking the fields to find Korgana sitting at the kitchen table with an odd expression on her face. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant," she said. The world seemed to stop. Tobias stood frozen, trying to process the words. We're going to have a baby," she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know we talked about it, but I didn't think it would happen so soon. I don't know if I'm ready. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if the child is rejected by both humans and orcs? What if Tobias crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, cutting off her spiral of fear? Then we'll figure it out together," he said firmly. "Just like we've figured out everything else. You're going to be an amazing mother, Korgana. And our child is going to be loved and protected no matter what." "You're not scared, terrified," he admitted with a shaky laugh, "but also excited and hopeful. We're going to bring a life into this world that represents peace, represents what's possible when people choose understanding over hatred. That's powerful." She pulled back to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "You really think we can do this?" "I know we can," he said, and kissed her. "We've already done the impossible. What's one more miracle?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though it became clear that Korgana's body was built for endurance in ways human women weren't. She continued to work alongside Tobias well into her second trimester, only slowing down when he insisted she needed to rest. The baby grew, and so did their excitement and preparation. They converted a small room upstairs into a nursery, painting it cheerful colors and building a crib from salvaged wood. Korgana sewed tiny clothes, her large hands surprisingly delicate with the needle. Tobias caught himself daydreaming about teaching a child to farm, about small hands helping to plant seeds and gather eggs from the chickens they'd recently acquired. In the 7th month of Korgana's pregnancy, they had visitors, but these were welcome ones. A young orc woman appeared at their door, thin and frightened, with a child of perhaps 4 years old clinging to her hand. "Please," she said in heavily accented common. "I heard there was an orc woman living here, one who left her clan and found safety with humans. I need help." Korgana immediately brought them inside, offering food and water while the woman told her story. Her name was Mara, and she'd fled an abusive mating with her young son. She had nowhere to go, no way to support herself. "Stay here," Korgana said without hesitation, looking at Tobias for confirmation. "At least until you get your feet under you. We have room and we could use the help when the baby comes." Tobias nodded his agreement. "You're welcome here as long as you need." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Bless you, both of you. Word spread about the farm where an orc woman and her human husband offered sanctuary. Over the next few months, others came, orcs fleeing violence or persecution, humans who'd been cast out for sympathizing with orcs, even a few half-orcs who'd never been accepted anywhere. Tobias and Korgana turned no one away. The farm became a refuge, a community of those who'd chosen peace over the prejudices of their cultures. It wasn't easy. Resources were stretched thin, and there were tensions as people from different backgrounds learned to live together. But slowly, gradually, something remarkable emerged. A functioning community built on mutual respect and shared labor. The farm expanded, new fields were cleared, and structures were built to house everyone. Korgana gave birth on a cool autumn evening, exactly a year after she and Tobias had legally married. The labor was long and difficult, attended by both the human midwife from town and Mara, who had experience with births. Tobias paced outside the room, terrified and useless, until he finally heard a baby's cry. When he was allowed in, he found Korgana exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. "Meet your daughter," she said softly. Tobias looked down at the infant and felt his heart expand in his chest. She was perfect, her skin a light jade green, softer than Korgana's deeper emerald, with tiny pointed ears and the smallest suggestions of tusks. Her eyes, when they opened, were the same amber as her mother's. "She's beautiful," he whispered, afraid to touch something so small and precious. "She's perfect." "Hold her," Korgana urged, and carefully transferred the baby into his arms. The infant was impossibly light, warm and alive in his hands. She made a small noise and wrapped one tiny hand around his finger, and Tobias felt tears stream down his face. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." They named her Talia, which meant morning light in the old human tongue. She was the first child born to the community, and everyone treated her like she belonged to all of them. Mara helped with the nighttime feedings. The elderly human couple from town, who'd become regular visitors, brought gifts and advice. Even the stern blacksmith who'd initially disapproved of the mixed marriage softened when he saw the baby, admitting grudgingly that she was a fine-looking child. Talia became a symbol of what was possible, proof that humans and orcs could not just coexist, but create something new together. As she grew from infant to toddler, more families came to the farm, seeking the community and acceptance they couldn't find elsewhere. What had started as one isolated farmhouse had become a thriving settlement. The local authorities initially viewed the growing community with suspicion, but Tobias worked hard to maintain good relations. They paid their taxes, contributed to the regional food supply, and never caused trouble. When bandits threatened the area, the community's orc warriors helped defend human settlements, earning grudging respect. Slowly, acceptance grew. On a warm spring day, 3 years after Korgana had stumbled bleeding into his wheat field, Tobias stood on his porch looking out over the transformed landscape. The original wheat field was still there, but now it was surrounded by vegetable gardens, orchards, pastures with livestock, and neat rows of houses. Children played in the common area, human children, orc children, and mixed heritage children, all together without thought to their differences. Korgana came up beside him, Talia on her hip. Their daughter was babbling something about the flowers she'd picked, her small tusks showing when she smiled. "Hard to believe this is the same place, isn't it?" Korgana said. "Hard to believe any of this is real," Tobias admitted. "Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and find myself still alone in that house, slowly going crazy from isolation." "Well, if you're dreaming, then I am too." She shifted Talia to her other hip. "The council wants to officially name the settlement. They're suggesting we call it Haven, but they wanted our input since this is technically still our land. Haven works, Tobias said. It's what this place has become, after all, a haven for everyone who needs one. A young human man came running up, one of the newer arrivals. Tobias. There's a delegation from the capital. They want to talk to you and Korgana. They exchanged glances, both immediately wary. Official attention was rarely good news, but they made their way to the community center, a large building they'd constructed for meetings and celebrations. The delegation consisted of 3 people, 2 human officials and, surprisingly, an orc in formal diplomatic robes. The orc stepped forward first. "I am Urgath," he said, and Tobias recognized him as the treaty representative who'd interviewed Korgana years ago. "I've been asked to visit your settlement as part of a review of the treaty implementation." "Are we in trouble?" Korgana asked bluntly, still holding Talia protectively. "On the contrary," one of the human officials said, "your community has become a model for peaceful integration. We've had inquiries from other regions wanting to know how you've managed to create such a successful mixed settlement." Urgath nodded. "Both the human government and the Orc Clan Council are interested in your methods. How you've handled disputes, organized labor, integrated different cultural practices. We'd like your permission to document what you've built here and share it with others." Tobias felt Korgana's hand slip into his and he squeezed it. "We're not special," he said. "We just treated each other like people instead of enemies. We shared resources, we listened to each other, and we were willing to compromise." "That's rarer than you think," the official said. "Most attempts at integration fail because neither side is willing to truly change. But you've built something that takes the best of both cultures and creates something new." They spent hours talking with the delegation, answering questions about everything from how they handled farming decisions to how they were educating the children. Talia, bored with adult conversation, eventually squirmed down from Korgana's lap and went to play with the other children visible through the window. "She's lovely," Urgath said, watching her. "And she represents the future better than any treaty document could. Children who grow up knowing both cultures, who see no division between species." He turned back to them. "You should be proud of what you've built here." After the delegation left, Tobias and Korgana walked slowly back to their house, their original farmhouse that now felt almost quaint compared to the bustling settlement around it. They sat on the porch steps, watching the sun set over fields worked by dozens of hands. "You ever regret it?" Korgana asked quietly. "You could have turned me in that day, could have collected the reward and gone back to your quiet, simple life." Tobias pulled her close, kissing her temple. "That life wasn't living, it was just existing. You gave me everything, Korgana. Love, purpose, family, community. The only thing I regret is all the time I wasted being alone before you came into my life. I was bleeding and half dead when you found me," she pointed out with a smile. "Not exactly a romantic first meeting." "No," he agreed, "but you trusted me enough to ask for help. And I was lucky enough to say yes." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on. I think Mara's making that stew you love for dinner, and if we're late, Talia will eat all the good pieces." Korgana took his hand and let him pull her up. As they walked toward the community dining hall, their hands linked and their daughter running to meet them with a gap-toothed grin, Tobias felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. He'd gone to war and come home broken. He'd hidden on a farm and convinced himself that isolation was healing. But healing, real healing, had only come when he'd chosen compassion over fear, when he'd helped a wounded orc woman instead of turning her away. That choice had given him everything: a wife he loved deeply, a daughter who amazed him every day, and a community that proved peace was possible if people were willing to work for it. The future was still uncertain, still full of challenges, but they would face them together. As they entered the dining hall and were engulfed by the noise and warmth of their found family, Tobias caught Korgana's eye and saw his own joy reflected there. This was what happiness looked like, not perfect, not easy, but real and worth fighting for. The wheat field where they'd first met was harvested every year, the golden grain feeding their growing community. And every autumn, on the anniversary of that day, Tobias and Korgana would walk out into that field together, holding hands among the stalks, and remember the desperate plea that had changed both their lives. "Don't tell them I'm here." He never had told them. Instead, he'd given her a home, and she'd given him a reason to live again. In the end, that simple choice had rippled outward, creating something neither of them could have imagined. A place where humans and orcs worked side by side, where children of both species played together, where the old hatreds were slowly being replaced by understanding. It wasn't perfect. There were still people in town who wouldn't accept them, still orc clans that viewed Haven with suspicion or hostility. But every day, in small ways, they proved that another way was possible. 5 years after that first meeting, on a crisp autumn morning, Tobias woke to find Korgana already up and dressed. "Come on," she said when she saw him stirring. "I want to show you something." Still half asleep, he followed her out to the wheat field. The harvest was in full swing, with teams of workers moving through the golden stalks. But Korgana led him to the exact spot where he'd found her that day, now marked by a small stone. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply. "Properly. When I asked you not to tell them where I was asking you to save my life, but you gave me so much more than that." She took both his hands in hers. "You gave me hope, and love, and a future I never dreamed was possible. You gave me a home." "You gave me the same," Tobias said, his throat tight with emotion. "I was just going through the motions before you came. You reminded me why life is worth living." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, surrounded by the wheat that had witnessed the beginning of their story. When they pulled apart, Talia's voice called out from the farmhouse, demanding breakfast, and they laughed together. "Come on," Korgana said, tugging his hand. "Our daughter waits for no one, and I think Mara said something about making those apple pastries you love." As they walked back toward the farmhouse, toward the family and community that awaited them, Tobias looked back once at the wheat field. It was just a field now, no longer marked by blood or fear. Just golden grain swaying in the breeze, ordinary and peaceful. But for him and Korgana, it would always be sacred ground, the place where their story began, where compassion triumphed over hatred, where two broken souls found each other and built something beautiful from the ruins of their past. The sun rose higher, warming the earth and illuminating Haven in golden light. In the distance, the sounds of the community waking up filled the air, children laughing, adults calling greetings, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle in the pasture. It was the sound of life, of hope, of a future being built one day at a time, and at the center of it all was the simple truth that had started everything. One person choosing kindness when they could have chosen fear. One person saying yes when it would have been easier to say no. One person extending a hand to help someone who needed it, and in doing so, finding their own salvation. Tobias and Korgana reached the farmhouse, and Talia burst out the door, her small tusks showing as she grinned. "Papa, Mama, Uncle Thrun says he saw baby chicks in the coop. Can we go see?" "After breakfast," Korgana said firmly, catching their daughter and swinging her up into her arms. "You need to eat first." "But Mama, no arguments," Tobias said, though he was smiling. "The chicks will still be there after you've eaten." Talia pouted dramatically but subsided, and they went inside to the warm kitchen where Mara was indeed making apple pastries along with eggs and porridge. The table was crowded with people their extended family of choice, all the souls who'd found refuge here. As they ate and talked and laughed together, Tobias felt a bone-deep gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. He'd thought he was just saving one life when he'd helped Korgana in the wheat field. He hadn't realized he was saving his own. Now, surrounded by love and purpose and the daily beautiful chaos of a life well lived, he understood the truth. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism aren't done on battlefields or in grand gestures. Sometimes they're as simple as offering help to someone in need, choosing compassion over convenience, and being brave enough to let yourself care. That was the real story of Haven, the real magic of what they'd built. Not that humans and orcs could coexist, though that was remarkable enough, but that people could change, could heal, could choose to be better than their circumstances demanded. And it had all started with a desperate whisper in a wheat field. "Don't tell them I'm here." Tobias never had. Instead, he'd built her a home, and in doing so, he'd found his own. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Haven grew from a settlement into a proper village, recognized officially by both human and orc authorities as a model for integration. Talia grew up strong and confident, eventually training as a healer, dedicated to helping anyone who needed it regardless of their species. She became a bridge between worlds, just as her parents had been. More children were born, more families arrived, and the community flourished. The wheat field that had started it all continued to produce golden grain year after year, a constant reminder of where they'd come from and how far they'd traveled. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tobias commissioned a painting from one of the artists who joined the community. It depicted a wheat field at sunset, with two figures standing hand in hand among the stalks, one human, one orc, both looking toward a bright horizon. "It's perfect," Korgana said when she saw it, "though I think you've made me prettier than I actually am." "Impossible," Tobias said, pulling her close. "You're exactly this beautiful, more even." She laughed and kissed him. "Flatterer." "Truth-teller," he corrected. They hung the painting in their bedroom where they could see it every morning when they woke and every evening before they slept. It served as a reminder of their beginning, of the improbable love story that had changed so many lives. Because that's what it was in the end. A love story. Not just between Tobias and Korgana, though their love was the foundation of everything else. But also a larger love for community, for peace, for the belief that people could be better than their worst impulses. Every harvest season, when the wheat turned golden and the air smelled of earth and growing things, Tobias would walk out into the field and remember that day. Remember the choice he'd made, the hand he'd extended, the life he'd saved. And he'd feel grateful, so grateful, for whatever impulse of compassion had moved him to help instead of hurt. Korgana would find him there sometimes, standing among the wheat with a distant look in his eyes. She always knew what he was thinking about, and she'd take his hand without speaking. They'd stand together in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. This was their happily ever after. Not perfect, not without struggles, but real and earned and deeply, profoundly good. A life built on the simple foundation of choosing kindness, of seeing the person behind the enemy, of being brave enough to help even when it was dangerous. The wheat continued to grow, season after season, and Haven continued to thrive. And at the heart of it all were two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and proved that love, real, lasting, transformative love, could overcome even the deepest divides. Their story became legend in the region, told to children as a bedtime tale, referenced by diplomats during treaty negotiations, held up as proof that peace was possible. But for Tobias and Korgana, it was simply their life. Their beautiful, hard-won, precious life. And every year, when autumn painted the wheat fields gold and the harvest moon rose over Haven, they would hold each other close and whisper the words that had started it all. "Don't tell them I'm here. I never will. You're home now. You're safe. You're loved." And that, in the end, was the promise they'd kept for a lifetime, to be each other's home, each other's safety, each other's love. No matter what came, they would face it together. They were no longer the broken soldier and the desperate deserter who'd met in a wheat field. They were partners, lovers, parents, and the living proof that choosing compassion over hatred could change the world. Their legacy lived on in every child who grew up in Haven knowing both human and orc culture, in every mixed couple who found acceptance there, in every person who learned that differences didn't have to mean division. The wheat field remembered. The earth remembered. And love, having taken root in that unlikely soil, continued to grow and flourish, bearing fruit year after year, harvest after harvest, generation after generation. This was their happily ever after, and it was more than either of them had ever dared to dream.